What if I told you that deep within your psyche lies a figure so powerful, so transformative, that reaching her final phase could fundamentally alter everything you thought you knew about yourself? Carl Jung spent decades mapping the architecture of the human soul, and buried within his work is a concept that most people never fully grasp: the evolution of the queen archetype within the feminine psyche. This isn't just another psychology video. This is about the rarest psychological transformation that a woman or the feminine aspect within anyone can undergo. A metamorphosis so complete that fewer than 1% ever reach its final stage. Today, we're diving deep into the final phase of the queen archetype, the psychological crucible that separates those who merely exist from those who truly reign over their own destiny. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why this transformation is so rare, so powerful, and perhaps why you're already on this path without even knowing it. Act 1. The Foundation. Section 1. Understanding Jungian Archetypes. Before we can understand the Queen's final phase, we need to establish the foundation. Carl Jung revolutionized psychology by proposing that we're not just individuals shaped by personal experience, we're also connected to a collective unconscious, a shared psychological inheritance containing universal patterns he called archetypes. Think of archetypes as psychological blueprints. They're the same reason why cultures separated by oceans and millennia created similar myths, similar gods, similar stories. The hero, the wise old man, the shadow, and yes, the queen. But here's what most people misunderstand. Archetypes aren't static. They evolve. They transform. They move through phases. Jung understood that psychological development isn't linear, it's cyclical, spiral, alchemical. The queen archetype, specifically, undergoes one of the most profound transformations in the entire Jungian framework. Most psychology content stops at understanding what archetypes are. But we're going deeper. We're exploring how the queen archetype evolves through distinct phases, each one building upon the last, until, if the conditions are right, if the inner work is done, she reaches her final, transcendent form. Section 2. The 4 primary phases of the queen. Jung and his successors, particularly the Jungian analysts who focused on feminine psychology, identified that the queen archetype moves through 4 primary developmental phases. Think of them as kingdoms of consciousness, each with its own challenges, lessons, and powers. Phase 1. The princess, the kingdom of potential. In this initial phase, we encounter what Jung called the Puella, the eternal girl. This is the realm of pure potential, of dreams not yet tested by reality. The princess lives in fantasy, in someday, in the castle of her imagination. She's waiting to be discovered, waiting to be chosen, waiting for life to begin when external validation arrives. Her crown exists only in fairy tales she tells herself. Many women and the feminine aspects within all people get stuck here indefinitely. Society even encourages it. Stay young, stay desirable, stay passive. The princess is enchanting but powerless, beautiful but incomplete. Phase 2. The warrior queen, the kingdom of power. Something shifts. Reality intrudes. Betrayal, loss, responsibility life demands she stop waiting and start taking. This is the awakening of the warrior queen. This is where most modern discussions of female empowerment stop. The warrior queen claims her space, sets boundaries, fights for her values, refuses to be diminished. She's learned that waiting for rescue is a cage, and she's broken free. She's powerful. She's fierce. She's respected. But Jung understood something crucial. The warrior queen, for all her strength, is still primarily reactive. She's defined by her battles, by what she's fighting against. Her kingdom is built on constant vigilance, on never lowering her guard. Many powerful women live their entire lives in this phase. CEOs who can never stop proving themselves. Activists who become addicted to the fight. Women who've built impenetrable walls and forgotten how to open the gate. Phase 3. The Mother Queen, the Kingdom of Connection. If she's fortunate, if she does the inner work, the warrior queen begins to transform. She discovers that true power isn't just about conquest and defense, about creation, cultivation, and connection. The Mother Queen builds her kingdom not through force, but through fostering growth in herself and others. She's transitioned from I must survive and dominate to I must nurture and create legacy. This is beautiful. This is where many spiritual traditions tell women to aim. Be the nurturer. Be the creator of life and culture. Be the heart of your domain. But Jung, in his profound understanding of psychological development, knew this still wasn't the final phase. Because the Mother Queen, despite her beauty and generosity, can lose herself entirely in others. Her identity becomes fused with those she nurtures. When they suffer, she suffers. When they fail, she fails. When they leave, who is she? The Mother Queen risks the greatest loss of all, the loss of her sovereign self in service to everyone else's becoming. And this is where we approach the threshold, the edge of the known, the final transformation that few ever achieve. Act 2. The Threshold. Section 3. The Dark Night of the Queen. To reach the final phase, something must break. Not the small breaks, we've all had those. I'm talking about the kind of psychological shattering that Jung called enantiodromia, when things turn into their opposite, when the very foundations of identity dissolve. This is the dark night of the Queen. It often arrives at midlife, though it can come earlier for those who've lived intensely. Everything she's built, her career, her relationships, her role, her identity suddenly feels hollow. Not failed, mind you, hollow. She's achieved. She's succeeded by every external measure. And yet, Jung called this the confrontation with the self-capital S. This is when the ego, that constructed identity we call me, realizes it's not actually in charge. That beneath the princess who became a warrior, who became a mother, lies something else entirely. In this phase, she must face her shadow, all the parts of herself she exiled to become acceptable, successful, loved, the rage she suppressed to be nurturing, the ambition she hid to seem humble, the wildness she tamed to appear civilized, the darkness she denied to embody light. This is terrifying, because integrating the shadow means acknowledging that you're capable of everything you judged in others. Every cruelty, every pettiness, every darkness exists as potential within you. But here's the paradox Jung discovered. Only by accepting this totality, light and shadow, creation and destruction, love and rage, can true sovereignty emerge. The dark night isn't punishment. It's initiation. Section 4. The Alchemical Process. Jung was obsessed with alchemy, not because he believed in turning lead into gold, but because he recognized that alchemical texts were actually describing psychological transformation in symbolic language. The alchemists spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the death of the old form. This is the dark night we just discussed. But after nigredo comes albedo, the whitening, the purification, the emergence of clarity. And finally, rubedo, the reddening, the integration, the birth of the philosophical gold. In psychological terms, this means the dissolution. Everything you thought defined you dissolves. Career, relationships, roles, identities, they're revealed as constructs, not essence. The purification. In the emptiness that follows, you begin to discriminate between what was authentically you and what was performance, protection, or programming. The integration, you reclaim all the exiled parts, the shadow, the unlived lives, the roads not taken, and weave them into a greater wholeness. But here's what makes this process so rare. Most people abort it halfway through. The dissolution is too painful. The uncertainty too destabilizing. Society offers 1,000 ways to numb out, to retreat back to familiar roles, to pretend the call to transformation never happened. Some dive into new relationships to avoid facing themselves. Some throw themselves into new missions to escape the void. Some medicate, distract, or simply shrink back. And there's no judgment in this. The path to the final phase of the Queen requires resources psychological, emotional, sometimes financial, that not everyone has access to. It requires privilege in the form of time, space, and support. But for those who persist, for those who stay with the disintegration, who sit in the ashes of who they were, who resist the urge to immediately rebuild, something miraculous happens. The final phase emerges. Act 3. The Sovereign Queen. Section 5. Characteristics of the Sovereign Queen. Jung referred to this ultimate stage of development as individuation, becoming fully yourself, not who you were supposed to be or who others needed you to be, but the unique expression of consciousness you were always meant to embody. For the Queen archetype specifically, this is the Sovereign Queen. Let me be clear about what this means because it's often misunderstood. Characteristic 1. Self-possession without self-absorption. The Sovereign Queen has completed the journey from I need external validation to I am my own primary witness. But unlike narcissism, this isn't self-absorption, it's self-possession. She knows herself so thoroughly, light and shadow, strength and weakness, beauty and monstrosity, that she no longer needs to perform, prove, or pretend. This creates an extraordinary freedom. She can be vulnerable without being weak because she knows. Vulnerability is just honesty, not helplessness. She can be powerful without being cruel because her power comes from integration, not domination. Characteristic 2. Authority without authoritarianism. Here's something fascinating. The Sovereign Queen no longer needs to control others because she's mastered self-governance. Her authority is natural, not enforced. People follow her not because she demands it, but because she embodies something magnetic wholeness in a fractured world. Jung said that the individuated person becomes a reconciling symbol for others a living, proof that integration is possible. The Sovereign Queen demonstrates through her being that you can hold contradictions, embrace paradox, contain multitudes. Characteristic 3. Fierce compassion. Don't mistake the Sovereign Queen for some gentle, passive, wise woman. She's integrated her warrior, she still has boundaries, still protects what matters, still says no without guilt. But her fierceness now serves wisdom rather than ego. She doesn't fight battles to prove her worth. She fights only battles that align with her values. She doesn't wound others to protect herself. She speaks truth without cruelty. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between opposites until a third way emerges. Compassion without doormat passivity. Boundaries without walls. Strength without aggression. Characteristic 4. Creative generativity. The Sovereign Queen creates not from wounds seeking healing, not from ego seeking validation, but from overflow. Jung spoke about the second half of life being about meaning rather than achievement, contribution rather than accumulation. The Sovereign Queen naturally moves into generativity, creating, mentoring, building systems and structures that outlive her. But unlike the Mother Queen who could lose herself in nurturing, the Sovereign never abandons her center. She gives from abundance, not depletion. Characteristic 5. Comfortable with mystery. Perhaps most remarkably, The Sovereign Queen has made peace with not knowing. She's done the psychological work to understand herself, yes. But she's also touched something that Jung called the numinous, the sacred mystery at the heart of existence that can't be fully rationalized or explained. She's comfortable saying, I don't know. She's comfortable with paradox. She doesn't need reality to be simple or certain. This makes her wise rather than merely knowledgeable, deep rather than merely educated. Section 6. Why so few reach this phase? Now we come to the uncomfortable truth. Fewer than 1% ever reach the final phase of the Sovereign Queen. Why? Reason 1. Society actively discourages it. Our culture tells women to remain perpetually in the princess phase, young, decorative, waiting to be chosen, or to get stuck in the warrior queen phase, constantly achieving, competing, proving. The Sovereign Queen doesn't fit neatly into consumer culture. She doesn't need constant products to fix her inadequacy. She doesn't stay perpetually busy to avoid herself. She doesn't hunger for status symbols because she's found her worth internally. In other words, she's not a profitable demographic. Reason 2. The path requires suffering, real suffering. I'm not talking about the ordinary pain of daily life. I'm talking about the psychological death and rebirth that individuation requires. Most self-help content promises transformation without discomfort. 5 easy steps to authentic power. But Jung was brutally honest. Real transformation requires descent before ascent, disintegration before reintegration. You can't skip the dark night. You can't outsource the shadow work. You can't hire someone to individuate for you. And our pain-avoidant culture gives us endless tools to numb out before the process completes. Reason 3. It requires resources and support. To do deep psychological work, you need time, not just hours, but sustained periods where survival isn't consuming all your energy. Space, physical and psychological room to fall apart without becoming homeless or losing everything. Support, whether that's therapy, community, or mentors who've walked this path. Education, access to the concepts, frameworks, and practices that guide transformation. Not everyone has these resources. This isn't a moral failing, it's a reality of living in an unequal society. Some people are too busy surviving to transform. And there's no shame in that. Sometimes the heroic act is simply enduring. Reason 4. The timing must be right. Jung believed in Kairos, the right time, as opposed to Chronos, chronological time. The psyche has its own seasons, and individuation can't be forced before the soil is ready. Some people do all the right things, therapy, meditation, shadow work, but the transformation doesn't complete because psychologically, it's not yet time. The Sovereign Queen phase typically emerges in the second half of life, often after 40 or 50, because it requires the accumulated experience, disillusionment, and perspective that age provides. This isn't a linear achievement you can rush toward. It's a spiral you must live through. Reason 5. It requires choosing the harder path repeatedly. At every stage of development, we face a choice: comfort or growth, familiar or unknown, small safe life or expansive risky transformation. Most people, when the dark night descends, when the old identity crumbles, when the comfortable structures collapse, choose to rebuild the familiar as quickly as possible. The Sovereign Queen is the woman who, again and again, chose the unknown, who stayed with the discomfort, who resisted the urge to prematurely resolve tension. That's extraordinarily rare. Act 4. The Practical Path. Section 7. Recognizing where you are. So how do you know which phase you're in? And more importantly, how do you support your own evolution toward the Sovereign Queen? Let's start with honest self-assessment, not judgment, just observation. If you're predominantly in the princess phase, You're still waiting for permission, validation, or rescue before fully claiming your life. Your power feels conditional on being chosen, seen, or approved of by others. If you're predominantly in the warrior queen phase, you've claimed your power, but you're exhausted. Life feels like constant battle-proving yourself, defending boundaries, fighting to maintain what you've built. You can't remember the last time you truly rested. If you're predominantly in the mother-queen phase, you've shifted from fighting to nurturing, but you're disappearing into service. You can name everyone else's needs instantly but struggle to identify your own. When asked, "What do you want?" you draw a blank or immediately think of what others need. If you're approaching the sovereign queen phase, you feel like you're falling apart, and paradoxically, you're also more yourself than ever. External achievements matter less. Internal integrity matters more. You're becoming allergic to performance, pretense, and bullshit, including your own. Most people aren't purely in one phase. We contain elements of all of them, with one usually dominant. Section 8. Practices that support the journey. Now the practical work. These aren't quick fixes. They're practices that support the slow, organic unfolding of individuation. Practice 1. Shadow work. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Shadow work means investigating what you've disowned. What qualities do you despise in others? Those are often projected parts of yourself. What did you have to suppress to be loved as a child? That's waiting to be reclaimed. What aspects of yourself do you hide, even from yourself? That's where your power is locked. Practical exercise. Journal on these questions. What am I not supposed to be? What would I do if I didn't care what anyone thought? What parts of myself have I killed to be acceptable? Practice 2. Solitude, real solitude. Not loneliness, solitude. Time with yourself without distraction, entertainment, or numbing. The sovereign queen emerges from the willingness to be alone with yourself, all of yourself, including the uncomfortable parts. Practical exercise. Start with 20 minutes daily of device-free, activity-free solitude. Just be with yourself. Notice what arises: boredom, anxiety, memories, insights. Don't fix or change it. Just witness. Practice 3. Creative expression without audience. Create something: art, writing, movement, music with no intention of sharing it. This reconnects you to the pure expression of self rather than performance for validation. Jung used active imagination, having dialogues with different aspects of his psyche. You might journal as your shadow, paint your emotions, dance your rage or joy with no one watching. Practice 4. Mentorship in both directions. Seek out women further along the path, not necessarily older, but psychologically more developed. But also mentor those earlier in the journey. Teaching clarifies what you know. Learning humbles what you think you know. The sovereign queen is both student and teacher, always. Practice 5. Embrace the dissolution. When things fall apart, and they will resist the urge to immediately rebuild or distract. Sit in the ruins. Grieve what's dying. Trust that something is composting, that endings are also beginnings. This might be the most important practice, developing faith in the process, even when you can't see where it's leading. Practice 6. Question everything, especially your story about yourself. Who told you who you are? Your parents? Society? Past trauma? Past success? The sovereign queen continually questions the stories she tells herself. I'm not creative. I'm not smart enough. I'm too much. I'm not enough. Practical exercise. Write your life story. Then rewrite it from a different perspective. Then rewrite it as myth. Notice which version feels most true. Practice 7. Cultivate the transcendent function. Instead of either or thinking, practice both and. Hold contradictions without rushing to resolve them. I am strong and vulnerable. I am ambitious and content. I contain light and shadow. I seek connection and value solitude. The Sovereign Queen is the master of paradox. Act 5. The Call. Section 9. The Gift of the Sovereign Queen. Here's what Jung understood that most psychology misses. Your individuation isn't just for you. When you become more fully yourself, when you integrate your shadows and claim your sovereignty, you give permission to everyone around you to do the same. The Sovereign Queen doesn't preach or proselytize. She simply embodies wholeness in a world that tells us we must fragment ourselves to be acceptable. She's the woman who stopped apologizing for taking up space. She's the elder who shares wisdom without diminishing others. She's the leader who,